Sziasztok! The Hungarian Heritage Podcast is back for Season 3, and we are Hungarian Heritage Stronger Than Ever. For those of you who have been here a while, welcome back, and thanks so much for sticking around. And for those of you who are new to the podcast, welcome! I'm so happy that you're joining us. My name is Christine, and I'm the host here at the Hungarian Heritage Podcast. During Season 3, I will continue to bring you guests and topics that celebrate Hungarian culture, people, and food. And of course, we will feature all of the cool things that Hungarians are doing around the world. Together, we will discover new things and review things that you may already know. And most of all, we will have a lot of fun along the way. One episode at a time, we will build those bridges between Hungarians who live in Hungary to those who live in other parts of the world. Not to mention the bridges we will build between the generations. So, if you're looking to make that first connection to your Hungarian heritage, or you're looking to strengthen your connection, then you found the right place. Join me, and together we will connect your modern lives to your Hungarian heritage by expanding this Hungarian heritage community and making the circles of Hungarians around us Hungarian heritage strong. Welcome to this episode of the Hungarian Heritage Podcast. We are back with another episode in our series of Celebrating Hungarian Heritage Together. Previously, my guests on the podcast, Reka Bakos and Dr. Anna Fenyvesi, the editors of Hungarian Roots and American Dreams, will be my co-hosts for various episodes during Season 3 as we celebrate Hungarian Heritage Together. This collaborative series will feature guests who contributed their personal and family's stories in Reka and Anna's newly released book. In this episode, I'm thrilled to announce that my co-host will be Reka Bakos, and together we will be featuring Julie Galatocky's Hungarian heritage story. As Julie shares her family's story, you will not only learn about her family's journey from Hungary to America, but you will learn about Julie's Hungarian upbringing, her passion for genealogy research, her full circle connection with Sunday soup, and of course, when she finally met her Hungarian relatives for the first time. You will certainly feel the Hungarian connection when listening to Julie's story, and you will realize that you are not alone in your Hungarian heritage journey. Listen along as we celebrate Hungarian heritage together. Please join me in welcoming back to the Hungarian Heritage Podcast, Reka Bakos, co-editor of the book Hungarian Roots and American Dreams. Reka was my guest along with her co-author, Dr. Anna Fenyvesi, in the first episode of Season 3, where they talked about their newly released book. Today, Reka is once again joining me as a co-host in this season's collaborative series that features contributing authors from Hungarian Roots and American Dreams, as we continue to celebrate Hungarian heritage together. Welcome back, Reka. I'm excited to continue partnering with you on this collaborative series. Before we begin, can you reintroduce yourself to the listeners and give us a little overview of your newly released book, Hungarian Roots and American Dreams? And afterwards, you can introduce our guests for this episode.
Hi, Christine. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back again. Thank you, Christine, for having me.
Of course.
I think it's our fourth episode together, so it's an absolute pleasure to be on the podcast. And for those who don't know me, my name is Reka Bakos. I'm based in Hungary. I have a great-grandfather and a great-grandmother who emigrated to the US and then returned to Hungary. That's my connection to the Hungarian American community. And that heritage motivated me to found a Facebook group called Hungarian Roots and American Dreams. And out of those stories that were introduced in this Facebook group, we quite quickly decided that we want to share it with a broader audience. And that's how the book came to life. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Julie Galatocky, who was one of our authors. And Julie, thank you so much for agreeing to join us in the podcast and sharing your story, Sunday Soup, Bridging Parallel Worlds Across the Ocean.
Thank you.
Welcome, Julie. Thanks so much for being here today. There's so many facets to everyone's story that was contributed in the book. So the first question I'm going to ask you, because I feel like that's the beginning question. People start to look for their roots and they start to do research. Now, I know that when we had spoken previously, you are an expert in that department. So as we discussed, we could definitely do an entire episode on researching. So, but before we start, I'd like you to tell the listeners a little bit, how long have you been researching your Hungarian heritage, and give us a little like snapshot of some of the things that you've done to research before we move on to your story in the book.
Okay. Christine, before I answer your question,
sure,
I want to thank you and Reka for choosing me just to be on this podcast. But more importantly, Christine, I want to thank you for creating this podcast.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, I listen to a lot of audiobooks, but for the past couple of weeks, I've been listening to your podcast on my commute to and from work. And I'm really enjoying hearing all about these people's, experiences and life journeys. It's really inspiring. This is the one that stands out to me. This young woman, Lena, she was studying in Debrecen.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, what a positive attitude.
Yes.
It was like 5:30 in the morning. I'm driving to work and I've got this grin from ear to ear, just listening to her.
Yeah, she would be really happy to hear you say that. She's a lovely woman, and I really enjoy speaking with all of my guests, so I have to say that. But I think you've pointed out a very important thing, that everybody has like a different experience. So the guests that come on my podcast, and thank you so much for saying such kind words about the podcast. It really warms my heart. But everybody brings a story to the podcast. I've heard people say to me, well, my story is not that important or exciting, but everybody's connection to their Hungarian heritage or the country of Hungary itself, because the woman you were speaking of, Lena, she's not Hungarian, but she was studying in Hungary. Right. So all of those experiences make people feel connected to their heritage or to the country of Hungary. And, I feel like everyone's story is important and should be heard. And that's why we're here. So thank you for saying all those nice things about.
I agree. And, I also wanted to say, I learned about the Balashi scholarship. I told my son about it. I downloaded the Hugo app on my phone.
Oh my goodness.
I was already looking, at
I
my
can't wait to
hometown.
tell. I can't wait to tell all of my guests about that, because that's really what it's about, is finding new things and making connections. So it's not just making connection with one or two things. And I know we're not talking about this now, but I have another episode about another opportunity that your son might be interested in, but we'll talk about that off the air. Because
I just wanted to tell you, I think you should just be so proud of what you're doing. And I really look forward to these episodes now. I'm like scrolling through my Spotify going, God, I hope these aren't going to run out soon.
No, they're not. No, they're not. I'm in it to win it. I'll be 80 years old. I'll still be doing this. So,
great.
And older too. Like I plan on living a long life. So thank you. These accolades just really warming my heart right now. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been researching for about 10 years. I started in 2015, although it seems like it's been much longer than that. I think when it first started, it was Christmas Day. After dinner, I was just having a conversation with my dad, and he was telling me about his grandfather, Sándor Galatocky. And weirdly, I was only 45 years old, and it was the first time I'd ever heard this name.
Yeah.
And his grandfather died of a gunshot wound to the chest right after New Year's Day. He was like in a little scuttle in a bar. And I
love the word scuttle.
Scuttle, yeah. So from what I understand, he was kind of sticking up for a friend, and he just got in the way, and the police officer shot. And my grandfather was, the one that, or not, my great grandfather was the one that was, got in the way. And when he did pass, his son was only 4.5 years old at the time. So, my dad just didn't know anything about his grandfather. And I know that him and his brother tried to do some research, but, kind of came up empty. And he just looked at me and said, hey, Julie, you're pretty good with computers. Why don't you see what you can find?
And that's where it started, right? That's really where it kind of, it really left the starting gate, and you just took off like a racehorse after that.
Yeah.
Correct.
And I think everyone who starts doing genealogy, you realize it's a snowball. Like when you start, you can't finish. You are just completely addicted to it, and you want to find new and new things again and again.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way, especially also we're all in, a similar age category where, we weren't born with computers. So when your grandfather or your dad, I'm sorry, when you were sitting at a holiday dinner, mentioned this information and you're like, wait, I've never heard those names before, that those were new opportunities, like, oh, you're good with a computer. Why don't you start researching? Like 25, 30 years ago, that wasn't an option.
No.
So, in our age category, it's definitely a different situation where these new things are available to us.
And Christine, I've thought about that. If it would have been 25, 30 years ago, and I would not have been able to do with this do it with the computer, would I have dove head first into it like I did this time? I sometimes feel like I'm this person that needs some instant gratification.
I understand.
If it takes me too long to get to that end result, I'm bored with it, and I give up.
Yeah.
And I think it usually, without computer, it also requires more time because you have to go to the archives, you have to go to the local, library, whatever. And you might say that, okay, I either need a holiday to do that, or I will wait until I retire and have more time to do that.
That's a good point.
Technology also enables us, dedicate just 15 minutes within a day to do that as a coffee break, or, even listening to something while you are driving to work. Yeah. And it saves us so much time.
Oh, sure. And in addition to the things that both of you have just said, we have our parents and grandparents who clearly didn't grow up with computers, and they had a different, I guess, a different mindset regarding information. And what I heard a lot, and not even in a negative way, was like, well, there weren't even phones back in the village, or, well, it would be too hard to find them. So I think they were resigned to the fact that the information just wouldn't be easily accessible. So why bother, essentially? Not in a negative way, but why bother? Because you'll never find it because there was no internet. So it's like you said, Reka, it's a snowball now because we have access. And I think access is the key. Yeah. Instant gratification access now.
Yes.
So to pull it all together with a bow. So you've been researching for a while.
Well, I wanted to tell you, not only that night.
Yeah.
When we were, my dad was telling me about his grandfather, because this kind of ties in with, my story in the book. Yeah. My mom, was obviously in the room with us, and she's listening to our whole conversation. And she's like, hey, if you're going to look for, your dad's grandfather, can you look, up some information about my grandfather? Because he just disappeared. Nobody knows where he went.
What a holiday that was, right?
Yeah. And
you're wait, what?
Yeah. I just remember thinking, how ironic is this that both of my parents' paternal grandfathers are just a complete mystery. Yeah. And I've never known about this. Why are they, and maybe they mentioned it before, but, we had that conversation, I had my children and my life and my work and, just things were busy.
And also too, don't you, now that you think back, and when you think back, you knew so much about certain things about, your Hungarian heritage, but yet you didn't know the questions to ask. So that's why we didn't know certain details. And they just happened to randomly come up with oh, you should look for my dad too, or my grandfather too. And, so we didn't know to ask the questions because we didn't know what questions to ask due to lack of access. So
I started researching, maybe, I want to say it was a year after my grandmother passed. She was 95.
Oh, wow.
And boy, I could just kick myself, for not just picking her brain for information, just on a bunch of stuff. But, well,
it's just, it's a new lens that you're looking through. You weren't looking through that lens and that thought process.
Yeah.
While your grandmother's alive.
Yeah.
My grandmother she was 80, 82 or 83 when she passed. And she lived with me
Oh,
the better part of 42 years. Because, so
yeah.
I know a lot, but then there's information. I'm like, why didn't I ask that? Why didn't I ask where her daughter was buried when she passed? Like, why didn't I ask some of those really important questions? Because I wasn't looking through that lens. And now I want to look through the lens. So now I have to do the research. So
yeah, and I think part of it is looking through the lens, Christine, and part of it also getting to a level of maturity in your personality, also situation in your life, and there's a mental space to, really dedicate to this. Because I was interested in genealogy quite early on. I asked those questions and I was even paying attention, but you don't pay attention like that. I just wanted to know information, but it wasn't really a really dedicated, research and preserving memories in the right way. So I listened to her, I digested the information, and then I let it go. So I think it's also the willingness and the maturity of what you want to do with it, where you want to get with it.
I completely agree, because, you're looking through different lenses throughout your life differently. And as much as you pay attention, you're paying attention to the things that they're telling you, not knowing like, oh, well, maybe I should ask this follow-up question.
Yes,
exactly. So a funny story about a follow-up question, like I said, my grandmother and grandfather lived with, throughout different situations, lived with me for, 42 years and of my life. And she would always say, oh, in the village, oh, in the village, oh, in the village, in the village where I lived, and 10,000 stories. And it wasn't really until right before she passed that what's the name of that village actually? Like, what? How did I not know that? I knew about the house and the apartment in Budapest. Ask me, I have so much information. Until I just didn't know the village name. I'm like, how did I not know that? I know about her brothers and sisters in the school she went to, in the church she went to. I knew all of it. How did I not know the name of the village? The lens wasn't there. I wasn't at the right stage. I was raising kids at the time, So all those things play a part in our genealogy research. And because of that, hopefully, as people listen to any episode on my podcast, or, this collaborative series that, I'm working on with Reka and Anna, hopefully they hear these things and they say, oh, let me ask these follow-up questions. So obviously they're gaining a connection as they listen to our stories, but if they gain insight on how to make their research better, I think we've done our job.
I think so too.
Yeah.
So, Julie, let's not spill the bean on what you found out about your great-grandfathers yet. Let's just fast forward to last year for a second, and please tell the listeners how you found the Hungarian Roots and American Dreams Facebook group. And I'm also curious, after joining the Facebook group, whether you did gain any additional insights from the other group members or any inspiration that helped you with your own family research.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure my cousin Jano is the one who sent me the link to the Facebook group. Yeah. Janos Sabon.
Yeah. So Janos Sabon is the other founder of the Facebook group. So we established it together.
Yeah. He's my cousin. He's my third cousin.
Wow.
And I did, prepare to tell you about how Jano and I connected. So maybe later on.
Yes,
absolutely.
Absolutely. That's why we're here, Julie, for sure.
I joined and probably shared a little of my story there after some prodding from certain people. As to gaining insight from other members for my own personal research, I think it might have been the other way around. Yeah, I don't want this to come off. I feel like I don't really need that much help in my own research. And I know earlier you called me an expert. I would not use that term for myself, but maybe well seasoned.
I feel like your zest and your curiosity allows you to be an expert in that field for yourself.
I really appreciate that, but there are other people out there, just as good, if not better.
It's a fair response. It's a fair response.
And maybe I'm being humble. I don't know. But yeah, so I'm pretty sure it was Reka's Facebook group. I met this woman, Erji Gergely.
Yeah.
You know her?
I recognize the names that frequently come up in the group. Yeah.
So I think, after I wrote my little story on there, she noticed that I was from Toledo and she reached out to ask if I could help her locate information about a female ancestor of hers that immigrated to Toledo. And she didn't know much about her older generations of her family. So I researched. I built her tree going back to the late 1700s on a couple of her lines. And she was so thankful.
Wow.
Yeah, I think just last week I sent her the chart, with her whole family tree. And she was excited. She's going to find like a template where she can input all the information and she wants to include pictures. So she has something to pass down to her children and her grandchildren. So
That's
like I said,
nice.
I don't reach out for help much, but I'd love to help other people. I love to just be able to use the tools that I've taught myself, really, to help. I'm not breaking my own brick walls, but I'm breaking other people's brick walls.
Well, in the process you are, so you may not have gained insight. You gained some camaraderie, you've gained friends, but you've given insight to other people. So as you mentioned before you started, to elaborate on that question, sometimes we have different roles in different scenarios, and your role is the giver of insight in how to research. So that's really great. That's a gift. One more question, because we want to discuss your story that was contributed to the book, Hungarian Roots and American Dreams. But, traditionally on my podcast, as you heard, we do start a little bit about talking about someone's Hungarian heritage, which clearly is the purpose of these collaborative series. But tell us about like your Hungarian life growing up. Did you have connections, the things that you did? You talked about folk dancing and things that you did like that with your family. Give us a little bit of insight as to what life was like for you growing up.
Sure. First of all, some people might actually know where I grew up. Do you remember the popular television show in the 70s called MASH?
Oh, big fan of MASH. Absolutely.
Okay, so you know Klinger.
Yes.
So Klinger,
From Toledo, Ohio.
Yeah, he used to dress up in women's clothing, hoping they'd kick him out, Well, on the show, Klinger would often reminisce about one of his favorite places in his hometown of Toledo, Ohio.
Okay.
Do you know what that was?
That I don't remember.
It was Tony Paco's restaurant.
That's a real place?
Yeah, it's home of the famous Hungarian hot dog.
Wow. Is it still around? More importantly.
Oh my gosh, they even have franchises now, like around the city of Toledo. Yeah.
Wow.
So if you go into the restaurant, they have like all kinds of famous people have visited, and they have hot dog buns that are framed on the wall that are signed like signatures of famous people.
That's so funny. That's so funny.
Yeah. So if you were a MASH fan and you remember Klinger talking about Toledo, that restaurant sits right on the edge of my Hungarian neighborhood. The name of it is called Birmingham.
Wow. Small world, right?
Yep. So I would describe Birmingham like almost like a small village in Hungary.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't need a car. Everything was in walking distance.
Nice.
There was really no need to leave. We had Takacs's meat market. You could go there and buy your groceries. And of course, for us kids, that's where we got our candy.
Of course.
You could buy fresh bread and pastries at the National Bakery. There were furniture stores, clothing stores. I had 2 piano teachers, within blocks of each other. And then there was a bar on every corner.
Julie, was it called kochma, like back in the villages?
That does not sound familiar to me.
Okay.
What was the word that you said?
Kochma.
What does that mean?
it's not as fancy as a bar. It's more like, these traditional places where people could get alcohol served.
Like a pub,
like a pub. Yeah, but sometimes it's even less nice as a pub. But it's really a place for, usually for men together and have a glass of wine or beer or palinka shots and just discuss the events of the day together.
Yeah, so in our neighborhood, most of the bars, they kind of just looked like maybe even a little apartment building, because whoever owned the bar, they would live on top.
Yeah, that's very traditional.
Upstairs.
Yeah.
And the bars were usually, from what I remember, they were named, it was like the person's surname. Like Monarchies.
Yeah.
There's Monarchies Bar. Yeah, that's kind of how it was. So, but I've never heard that name. No, but again, I'm from a little bit of an older generation as well. I mean, younger.
So you grew up in a very Hungarian influenced area.
I mean, even, some of the names of our streets were Hungarian. We had 2 churches. We had a Reformed church. We had 2 Catholic churches. I mean, like I said, you could walk anywhere. And I kind of felt like Birmingham, I just visualize it, that it was in its own little bubble inside the city of Toledo. And to me, there was Birmingham, and then there was the rest of Toledo. And I didn't really care about the rest of Toledo because this was just my little bubble.
Yeah. That's a special thing, I think, that you experienced, because, a quick follow-up question would be, what is it like now? I imagine a lot of those markets and bars and Hungarian related things have closed. Not all of them, but I'm sure they're not as.
It's actually, it's kind of sad to drive through Birmingham now. The churches are closing. Tuckach's meat market used to just be huge. It was well known, well out past Toledo. And the father started it, the son took over, but then the son died like at a very young age. This was, maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little less, but once he died, nobody took it over. It ended. The people that lived there started kind of moving to the outskirts. And now a lot of the house, some of the houses, I was talking to my dad the other day, the first house that we lived in, it was built in 1898. That neighborhood, it's just so old, and a lot of it is renters now.
Sure.
And
it's pretty typical of most communities. There's like a turnover, people move on.
Sure.
People, emigrate in large groups, and that starts to dissipate. People move on, and then, the groceries close down and the butcher shops close down. So like there's still remnants of, a culture, but not necessarily the richness that was there, decades prior.
Correct. Yeah. We do have, though, in the heart of that neighborhood, the Hungarian, it's just called the Hungarian Club.
Yeah.
And these people are really trying to, keep the heritage alive. They have events, they have dinners, they have things where people, can come and learn how to make nut rolls or learn how to make noodles or things like that. And then I don't know if I mentioned this to you guys or not, but they kind of in tandem work with Szeged. So Szeged,
it's like a sister city, maybe.
Yeah, Szeged is a sister city.
Wow.
And they do a lot of events, with that committee. And so I've even gone there, even though I don't, I live out in the country now. I'm probably about 30, 40 minutes away. I try and go in, to do certain, to do things when they have events. But I always think like, when I retire and I have more time, I'm going to go volunteer and, try and do more stuff. But so there's they're still plugging away. And then every year, since 1974, we've have a Hungarian ethnic festival.
Mm-hmm.
So every year it's kind of like, it's an event where you see all the old people from the neighborhood come back and just enjoy a day of Hungarian food, dance.
Yeah, I think that's very typical of those types of cities and towns where people have dissipated, but they do come back to like some of the organizations that are doing a great job with maintaining, the heritage, the athletic clubs and the other, some of the churches and organizations. And people do come back for those yearly or, multiple things that happen throughout the year because they want to maintain the connection. So it is typical, like I was saying, that in many cities and towns of what you're talking about what happened to, Birmingham. So.
Julie, you mentioned food that, that they try to, make sure that not only the language or the different customs, but also like the cuisine stays alive. And when we were preparing for this conversation, you mentioned Sunday soup many times. So do they do Sunday soup also in these community events? And we would be also curious to hear, what role it played in your family's life.
Before I explain to you the whole Sunday soup thing, I was thinking about this earlier today. Does anybody else call it Sunday soup, or was it just my family? Like when I say Sunday soup, do you automatically know what I'm talking about?
For me, I don't say Sunday soup, but if you ask my family, like I make soup easily once a week, like all the time. And I feel like the Sunday dinner, the dinner that happens at like 1:00 in the afternoon, that was something that was prevalent growing up with our Hungarian family. It wasn't always soup, but so Sunday soup, maybe different people have different connections to that phrase.
Yeah, and in Hungary, Julie, just to answer your question, so typical Sunday lunch menu is húsleves, which is like meat soup and rántott hús. So when you said Sunday soup, I was immediately thinking about húsleves.
Yeah.
And then I wasn't disappointed when I read your story and you explained how it is made and how it smelled and tasted.
So is that that's what it is then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the story, really starts with my grandma Gal. I always thought that my grandma Gal was Hungarian because she cooked all kinds of Hungarian food. I mean, truly, that's how my mom and all her sisters learned how to cook. I was surprised later in life to learn that she was actually of German and French descent. She only learned how to cook Hungarian because her husband made his mom teach her all his favorite dishes. Yeah, so I was really close to my grandma. And when I was in my early 20s, I was working a swing shift at a local factory, but I lived about 25 miles away. My grandma only lived 4 miles away from where I worked. So when I was on third shift, I would stay with her in town, I would call it, so that I didn't have to drive home just dog tired. So those weeks that I spent with my grandmother, they were just treats. I would wake up around 11:30 or 12, and she would have lunch on the table. And one day I woke up to the smell of Sunday soup and thinking, oh, we're having Sunday soup for lunch. But we didn't have Sunday soup that day. She just had it on the stove, going in the kitchen. So I was hanging out with her in the kitchen, and she said, Julie, it's very important to not let your soup boil hard. You must keep it under low simmer and keep skimming the scum off or your broth will be cloudy. You want it to have clear broth. And if you see someone's Sunday soup with clear broth, you know they did it right. Yeah. So I tucked that little nugget of information away.
Isn't it funny how like those moments of you just hanging out with your grandma because, she was close to where you worked. And of course she cooked for you because that's what grandmas do. And that little nugget of information, has stayed with you for many great stories that we'll talk about later too.
Exactly. I was going to say,
turned out to be a defining moment, right, Julie? Because when you were thinking about the title of your book, it starts with Sunday soup. So why don't you just, introduce the story that is included in the Hungarian Roots and American Dreams book? We are really curious to hear more about your great-grandfather's story.
Yeah, tell us, Julie.
Yeah, sure. So, obviously I have two great-grandfathers to talk about, but I'll start with my mom's grandfather. That was Joseph Gall. He was born in Felső in Hungary. And there was never really a question about his parentage, just where did he go and why. He married Maria Molnar in 1903 in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and they made their way to Birmingham, Toledo, Ohio. And together they had 4 children. The last proof of residence I have for him in Toledo is from the 1910 census.
Okay.
So I did have an opportunity before my oldest aunt died. I had a conversation with her. And, I kind of asked her, and, do you know why he left? And she told me that she had always heard that he wanted to go back to Hungary. He wanted his wife and children to come with him, but his wife refused. So he left without them. And then during my research, I found an article in the newspaper where his wife began a divorce suit, which it's just odd to me that I found all these details in this article, like all your what do they call it? All your dirty laundry is out there in the newspaper, you know?
It's public record. All that stuff
but this divorce suit, she claimed that he never properly supported her. He forced her to take in boarders and do washing and ironing for other people. This was all in the newspaper. So she was granted a divorce without his presence in May of 1911. Once she was divorced, it took about a year, but she finally remarried. And she had 8 more children after that.
I just wanted to point out, what a strong woman she was to move forward at that time, to move forward with like a divorce, file that. Like that was, I don't want to say unheard of. Of course, people did it, but it takes a strong female at that time, at a time where what was the year again?
1910, 1911.
Yeah, we didn't in the U.S. We didn't even have the right to vote yet, females. But like that was a very strong to do that as a female. So
and not just keeping quiet and keeping it as a secret and being ashamed of it, but she put it all out there, and she decided to do that, and she followed through.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean that's a strong-willed person.
Well, yeah. So anyway, so he left, and nobody knew where he went. But my mom always told me stories that her father would hop a train east illegally to go visit his father in Connecticut, that supposedly he was a butcher there. Okay. So when I did start my research on him, I started it in Connecticut, and I did find some evidence that he lived there, but never a death record. So my question was always, did he go back to Hungary?
Right.
And I'm going to get to that. I'm going to kind of move on to my other great-grandfather, and we'll pick up, did he go back to Hungary or what happened? We'll pick that up in a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Stay tuned, right?
Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned.
So through my research, I found that my other great-grandfather, Sándor Galatocky, he was born illegitimate in Monok, Hungary. So he took his mother's family name. So his mother was Borbola Galatocky. That's a whole nother, that really truly is my drive in my entire research. But he married in 1900. He had 2 sons, and he lived in Zdenc, which is a neighboring village. He was a police officer, and he was stationed in Kassa, Hungary, which is now Košice in Slovakia. And in 1908, he disappeared from Hungary, and his family never heard from him again. I mean, I know more of the story, but I thought I found some other stuff. So 11 years later, in 1929, I found like a post, like it was a newspaper post.
Yeah.
That his youngest son in Hungary, who was around 22 at the time, posted an announcement that went out to many villages requesting for any information about this missing man, Sándor Galatocky. Well, I found out that said missing man arrived in the United States in June of 1908. And in July of 1908, so just a month later, in Birmingham, Toledo, Ohio, he married my great-grandmother, who arrived a year prior to that, and she was coming from Kassa, Hungary.
Wow. You're telling me about these family members on both sides. What strong-willed people you have in your family they were brave, they moved on their own. Those are things that I feel like today, and like they moved on their own, not because of any political reasons. They moved because they were just maybe looking for opportunity. That's really representative in your personality too, with your steadfast approach to doing research. Like you can see that in your DNA.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah,
but
of course.
I look at any person who stepped on a boat to cross the ocean.
Yeah.
Any of those people, what were they thinking? And
right.
I think about, and just recently, I've been talking to my dad so much. I said, Dad, how did your grandmother, like I'm looking at her passenger list.
Yeah.
And it said she was coming to Toledo to a Michał Vash. I'm like,
okay.
Who is he? It said that he was her brother-in-law, but I have no evidence of this. And was she just lying? And how could this 22-year-old woman get on a boat all by herself and go to a city where she knows absolutely no one?
Yeah. It's really strong, like personality. They just have such strong convictions to change their lives, make their lives better. And it's really impressive when you look back at all the people, like you said, that just stepped on a boat to do that, because it's so brave, even if they had to do it. It's like a very brave move to change your life like that.
I remember, I think I forgot to tell you about this story. When my dad was first telling me about, Sándor, and he was a mystery, and can you look to find some stuff? He told me about a story that his mother told him. And when, Sándor died, his wife lived for another 29 years. But at the end of her life, she went and lived with my grandparents. So her son, her only son, and my grandmother took care of her, for the last 3 years of her life.
Yeah.
Because she was very sick. And my grandma recalls that on her deathbed, she said something to my grandfather that upset him so much. He came out of the room, he gathered everything he had from his, long dead father, and went into the backyard and burned everything in a burn barrel.
Wow.
And I mean, I remember when my dad was telling this, my eyes must have been as big as saucers. Like, and I said, well, what was it? What did he burn? What did she tell him? And my dad said, I don't know. Even my mom did not ask him. Like, when someone's really upset and you're just basically, oh, I'm just going to give them some space, right? Like, that's kind of how my grandma was. She's like, yeah, I'm not asking him what happened or what was said, but he was so upset.
Wow.
So when I think about, him coming over, he left a wife and 2 sons.
Yeah.
He married another woman here. I think what happened is on her deathbed, I think she told her son the truth, that he had, 2 brothers in Hungary.
Yeah.
He was an only child his whole entire life. Yeah. I think he had, he was upset because at that time he was 34 years old. He had 3 children. He had 1 on the way. He couldn't drop everything he was doing. He had to provide for his family. I'm sure he would be like, oh yeah, let's go to Hungary and, find my 2 long lost brothers, and maybe I have nieces and nephews now. But he couldn't do that. Just during that time, you can't do that. His wife didn't work, but I can.
Yeah. Sometimes it's hard to look back and judge why people did and didn't do something. because of what was happening in their life at the time. And I'm not saying everything that our families did were great or not great, but it's hard to judge, living in the time period that we live now compared to when they lived and the choices that they made or had to make, because we don't really know the whole story.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's how you have to always
I'm not judging. I'm just trying to kind of, cross the T's, dot the I's, and fill in the blanks,
Mm-hmm.
and put myself in his position, and how would I feel if,
exactly.
Or that I think he was also disappointed because, he had an image of his dad in his head, the kind of man he has seen him all his life. And then this image was completely destroyed.
Yeah.
Like many, many years later after he died. And I can even imagine that he was in denial for a long time, because that might have been something he didn't want to deal with, because it was such a shock.
Of course. That's well said. Absolutely.
Yeah, so this kind of leads me into how I took my trip to Hungary. After I found, that out, I'm like, man, I must have, I've got family over there probably. So, I just kind of continued my research, and that's when I met Jano. We talked about Jano earlier. So, I talk about genealogy, and I know you can hear the passion that comes through. But of course, when I started, it was just, building a family tree and growing my family tree, to see how many people, I could find. And at that point, I was uploading my tree to every platform that I could possibly upload it to, because I thought, if I can get my tree out there to all these different platforms, then statistically, someone is going to find me, or someone is going to see their family in my tree. And that's really exactly what happened. I got a message, I think it was through Facebook Messenger, from Jano. He asked me, he's like, why is my great grandfather in your family tree? And, so one thing led to another, and we started chatting, and we quickly realized we were third cousins.
Okay.
Jano's great grandfather married my great grandfather, Josef Gall's sister.
Okay.
So, we realized we were third cousins, and we were just fast friends. We swapped family stories and pictures. He told me about his great grandfather. I told him about mine. But Jano is really into preserving pictures and history, and he's always on the lookout for something sacred to save. My family had no pictures of Josef Gall because he left Toledo, like I said earlier, about 1911.
Right.
But Jano changed that. He was rooting around his mother's attic one day, probably looking for ancient Vadna artifacts, and a picture in a frame fell above and hit him on the head. He dusted it off and took it back to his house to investigate, and needless to say, it was a picture of my great-grandfather, Josef Gall, the only picture of Josef Gall.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I mean, it was meant to be that you guys connected.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's funny that he said, why are you on my family tree? Or why is your grand... Evidently, you're in the same forest. So I guess you quickly found that out together, which is so nice. And those names that you were just placing on your family tree, it came to life for you.
Correct. And that is one thing, you had mentioned, asked me earlier, one of the tools that I use in my research. And this is a normal evening for me. I will go to my DNA list, or my dad's DNA list, really. I'll just pick a name that maybe I haven't used before. Obviously, this person's related to me. I don't know how, but I'll plug this person in my tree, and I just build their family tree. I don't know them, but I just start building their tree, and I go as far as I can.
Right.
Because even I might spend a week or two on this person's tree, just building. And really, my purpose for that is is the same as what happened with Yano. There's people out there that are doing these ancestry tests just to see what their ethnicity is. It's kind of like a fun thing, or and I'm glad they're doing it. But I send so many messages that do not get responded to, because I'm like, hey, you've only got 2 people in your family tree. Could you give me a little more to get started?
Yeah.
But, my goal is to just build these people's family trees and hope that one day they see themselves, or they see their grandparent, or their great grandparent in a hint that comes up.
And sometimes people give up, they do a little research and then they don't go back to it on these platforms. So
exactly.
You're really helping them and doing the work, for them. And you're building, and you said that you're picking people in just your randomly. Family tree, or this randomly, or just
they from my dad's DNA match list.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
So I might, maybe I manage so many of my family's DNA. Like I'm up to I probably manage 60 DNA kits.
Look at you. You're like a DNA master there.
It's like I'm a collector of DNA.
I like it. So you're basically, like I said before, you're really building your forest of family trees.
Yes.
One connection at a time.
Yes, so. and that is my hope. And it's happened. It has happened again. Obviously, Yano and I have a great connection. He's the most selfless person I've ever met. And I've made so many more connections. But there will be people who've done the same thing. Hey, I saw this person in your tree, and I get really excited, but sometimes it just fizzles out because they're not as enthusiastic or interested as I am.
Right.
And I've done the work for them, and they're like, oh, okay. So, but on occasion there's that person that's just enthusiastic as I am.
Yeah. Well, that's all that counts. You're doing the work because it's a passion that you have. Mm-hmm. And if somebody finds, the equal appreciation for what you're doing, then those are just more friends that you're going to make along the way in your family forest.
Yep. My family forest. I like
in your
that.
Family forest. Yeah. That could be that could be the book that you write.
Yeah.
My family forest. So.
Or the agency you start.
Ooh, yes, exactly. Boy. Yes. We like to inspire people to take the next step.
Yeah, so Yano and I, we continue to communicate through Messenger. Him and I are just a month apart in age. So Yano always described to me repeatedly, he loved the saying that we came from the same family, but we've been living in parallel worlds.
Yeah.
From Hungary and me in the US. And eventually Yano and his wife invited me to come visit them. And I let them plan the entire trip. Wow. I just asked them to put a couple days aside for me to visit my Galatocky family.
When you finally arrived in Hungary for the first time, what were you feeling? Because you obviously didn't take a boat like your ancestors did. What were you feeling like when you first came off the airplane and just...
Yeah.
What were your emotions at that time?
Boy, it's, I was just happy. And when you ask me that question, like I can just see it in my mind. Like I'm having the vision of exactly me, coming through that tunnel or whatever. Yeah. And then coming out, and there's Yano and Andy. And when I hugged him, I just, and it's weird. Do you know what grounding is? Do you know,
yes, I do.
You know what that is?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I mean, I sleep on grounding sheets. It's supposed to just take all the negative energy out. And this is how Yano makes me feel. He just grounds me. And it just felt like that hug. That's the word. That's how I feel.
It's like the connection that you finally made after all that research that, like what a moving experience that, you were even fortunate enough to find someone, number one, and then also meet them in person. And,
And then we
how
were
moving.
lucky, we were supposed to go, and then COVID hit. So really, Yano and I had a good 2 or 3 years to really get to know each other, before we even met in person. So it was it was like, I know he's my third cousin and I know we'd never, met before. But it didn't matter. It felt like we'd known each other our entire lives.
It's the connection. You're both part of the same farce. So, I'm just going with that the whole episode, part of the same farce. But what a special moment that must have been when you finally met in person and just, going to Hungary the first time.
Right.
What a moving experience.
And I'm sure I could spend an entire episode telling you all about the trip, but I really want to tell you about what Yano did for me and for my family.
Okay. Well, we would love to hear it. So please tell us.
When he found that picture of Josef Gall in his mom's attic, it seemed he was on a personal mission afterwards just to find as much information as he could about my great-grandfather. He traveled to different villages. He found Gall relatives. He interviewed them. One woman who actually, I think, was one of his son's teachers back, a few years ago. He found her. She was another third cousin to me. Her name's Jusha. She knew more than anyone about Josef because her grandmother, Zsófia Gall, was Joseph's niece, and she was actually, I think Reka would understand this. She was quote unquote adopted by Josef when she was a young woman, and then she eventually inherited all of his property when he died in 1956. But Jusha had told Yano that she knew exactly where Josef Gall was buried, but his grave was unmarked. Because her and her grandmother used to go visit. So while we were there, we planned to meet Jusha at the cemetery in Felső Kelecsin. Am I saying that right, Reka?
Yeah. Felső Kelecsin.
Felső Kelecsin. But on the way, we stopped the car and we got out. Yano, he's always so secretive. He's like, "Oh, I have a surprise for you." So, the car stopped. I'm like, "What are we doing?" He's like, come on, get out. So we got out and we were up really high. And when we looked out, we could see our destination in the distance, but it was kind of like at a lower altitude, like we were up on this hill kind of thing. But the view, so in the distance was Felső Kelecsin, and the view was just incredible. The village was just surrounded by luscious green rolling hills. It was, that moment for me was just really moving because this thought came into my head, like, maybe I know why Josef Gall wanted to come back to Hungary. Like where I live in Ohio, everything is flat. It's just flat everywhere you look. So in Hungary, it's completely the opposite. It's almost like you're in Tennessee or Kentucky, and just looking out, I'm like, well, I mean, this is a good reason. I mean, it's just absolutely gorgeous. So yeah, that was just a really moving experience. But then we continued on. We went to the cemetery. Zsuzsa showed us the location where my great-grandfather was buried. And even before we arrived in Hungary, Yano had a grave marker made. It wasn't anything elaborate. It was, I think, made out of wood. It just had his name on it, his date of birth, his date of death. And we placed it on his grave 66 years after his death. So I just thought, how cool is that I'm standing in the cemetery at my grandfather's grave, and now, there is proof that he existed on this earth. None of that would have been possible, without Yano. Without me putting my family tree out there, without him seeing his grandfather's name, without him contacting me. I mean, it was just a snowball effect that really led me to right now on this podcast,
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many things like I want to say about that story, you really are living a parallel life with Yano, but also parallel personality because he has the same zest for
Yes.
this family heritage experience, and research that you do. So you could clearly see that you're related with your passion, but even just the kindness that he went out of his way to do that, to have the grave marker made was a very, I'm sure, like a very special moment in your life.
Yep, definitely on the top 5 for me.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So tell us a little bit more about your visiting your family and meeting some of your family members in Hungary.
So, spend a lot of time with Yano and Andy. That was great, but I told them, definitely give me some extra time because I gotta go meet the Galatocky side. And so every family member I visited in Hungary fed me. But for the sake of time, I'll only mention the food from one visit. And this is the visit that you want to hear about. This family lived in Zarench. My cousin spoke English, but her parents did not. I think her brother might have spoke a little English, but not much. We were only there for 10 minutes when her mother wanted us to go to the dining room table.
I'm sure.
And I have to, and Reka, you'll know this, and probably maybe Christine, but one thing that I noticed, and especially here at their house, we had to walk outside from their living room area to get to their kitchen.
Okay. It could be differently set up than what we're used to.
Sorry, was it an old house where they lived?
Was it an old house? I don't know.
Yeah, because that's not typical. I wouldn't say it's typical.
Maybe it was a room that was built on.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, or it was a kind of summer kitchen.
Oh, yeah,
that's what I was going to say. Summer kitchen,
maybe.
Yeah.
10 minutes we were there, and she's like, "Come, come eat," and she wants us to go to the dining room table. Yeah, so she served an appetizer of like avocado with garlic on toast, and next was a bowl of broth with these chiga noodles. And I just remember sitting there looking down at this broth and these noodles and just envision, like my head just kind of cocked.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this going, wait a minute, could this really be what I think it might be? So I put a spoonful in my mouth. And every time I talk about this, I get all choked up because instantly my tears just welled in my eyes. And the taste was exactly the same as the Sunday soup from my childhood. And it was just emotional.
Yeah.
And I felt like at that moment, it took this entire trip until that exact moment for it to really sink in that this is where I come from.
Yeah, you were home.
Yeah. So I looked up from the soup, and my cousin's mom, she was standing in the kitchen and she was just watching me. There were so many things going through my head, but I picked up my phone. I opened Google Translate. I typed in my request.
Oh, I'm so moved myself right now. So take a deep breath. I'm so excited for you to tell this part of the story.
So I typed in my request. I walked to her and she read the translation. It said, "I would like to compliment you on the clarity of your broth."
Oh my goodness.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. This is why we're here, to share these moving moments.
And her eyes got really big. She kissed both of my cheeks. She hugged me really tight. She didn't need words to tell me how happy she was.
Yeah.
And you guys are going to think I'm nuts, but I want to describe the feeling that I had. And do you know, like you can have what seems like 100 thoughts in a millisecond.
Mm-hmm.
I know it just sounds weird, but you know how when you're on a plane, so say you're taking the plane you're in New Jersey and you're taking it to Hungary.
Mm-hmm.
And on the back of the seat, the person in front of you, you can see from where you're going or from where you are to where you're going in that arc, that line.
Yeah.
You know how they have a arc of a line that draws.
Yeah, the flight path. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The flight path. I couldn't think of that name. So you can see this arc. And you know how on Star Trek, how they can beam somebody up, like beaming up
Yes, I
Scott?
do. Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
Maybe Reka doesn't know, but of course,
Yeah.
Christine, okay. So all their molecules are being instantaneously disassembled and then moved and then
Yeah.
reassembled to another place. Obviously, that didn't happen to me. But at that moment, thoughts were flying rapidly through my head.
Yeah.
Like my great grandparents emigrated over 100 years ago. They started at this end of the arc and they traveled to this end of the arc. I thought about love. I thought about family always being around me. I thought about my childhood in Birmingham, that continuing pride in our Hungarian heritage, the culture, the food. This was so normal for me because it was important to the people before me
Yeah.
to keep passing all of this on to the next generations. I thought about my grandma Gall giving me that little tidbit of information about Sunday soup. And now I'm traveling that same arc, but in the opposite direction, going back to where my great grandparents came from. And here I am eating Sunday soup with clear broth. And I know why the broth is clear. And it's the simplest thing, but it was the most incredible feeling of completeness. And I don't even know if that's the right word. I can't seem to find another word to describe it. But I mentioned the beam me up Scotty thing from Star Trek because at that moment, like all my synapses were firing with rocket fuel.
Wow.
That's how fast the thoughts were coming to me. And like my love for this DNA research and finding all these family members in other countries and right there I was right there with them. And
it's like that full circle.
And that was the thing. It's definitely
right?
that full circle moment.
Yeah. Because also, this is something I think we spoke about before too, is that food is such a huge connection. So for that recipe of Sunday soup, maintaining like the same process of how to make it from 100 years ago all the way to the US and back. Yeah. And that, your grandmother gave you that little nugget of information about not having it come to a roaring boil. It was meant to be. That's how I look at things like that. It was meant to be.
Just like, how you say all the time, the stars align.
Certain things are meant to be. Sometimes we just don't realize that we have to be patient and wait for them, because it didn't happen for us, say maybe 25 or 30 years ago, these connections that we've made with our families over in Hungary, but we have them now. And I think that's the most important thing. And it's what we do with them, which is also important.
And I forget there is one more because you have to go with the flow. So once you start that little snowball, you have to let it roll, because if you don't let it roll and if you don't take that leap, even if the stars are aligned, you are not walking that path that will lead you to the end of your journey, not the end of the journey, but the important milestones of your journey. So it's also your decision to embrace all of it.
Yeah. Like even if you take a break because of family things or raising kids or whatever, we're all doing in our lives, just to know that we should come back to it, to make sure that we continue that snowball. And so we can hit these milestones, because your story is so moving. All the stories are so moving. And what I love about them is the similar connections that they all have, but then the different experiences that each contributor to Hungarian Roots and American Dreams brings to the episode, and of course in the books. So we did talk about a little earlier in the episode how you found the Facebook group, and were you inspired? Did you inspire other people? And now that we've come full circle and you've told your story, can you give us like some parting comments about how your life has changed, that you've met Reka and Anna on the Facebook page and Jano, and sharing your story in the book, Hungarian Roots and American Dreams? How has that changed your life, Julie?
Oh, I've thought about this, and I have to tell you, my life has not changed much at all, except that I've been invited to do your podcast.
Aw.
My life is so structured. I work 8 hours a day. I have exercise class 3 times a week.
Right.
I clean the house. I do the laundry. I meal prep. Any free time that I have is researching.
Okay.
I even heard my boyfriend say something like earlier last week. He's like, I think you need an intervention, because
So
I'm just,
basically, yeah, your life hasn't changed outside of like your normal routine, but I feel like you've probably gained more inspiration from, this experience, from joining the Facebook group and helping other people, because it seems like your passion has increased since these events have occurred.
um, you can definitely say my passion is increasing, but it just, for me,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's always been there. The drive that, like we talked about that before, that instant gratification.
Yeah.
I get that every time I get on the computer, every time, that I go to Family Search and I'm searching through, church records, and I find a name, and I've been through this church record a million times. I'm like, wait a minute,
Mm-hmm.
those two people got married? Do I have that? And just little things like that, it just keeps me going. But I gotta tell you, the thing that I get the most pleasure from is helping others.
Yeah.
And at some point, I gotta figure out how I can, quit my job and do this for a living, because it's
Well, we're your cheerleaders in that department. So we definitely so maybe the question shouldn't have been, how was your life changed, but you're a life changer
Yes.
because of your passion. So I'd like to at least give you that title, that
okay.
you've become more of a life changer since joining the Facebook group and meeting your family, and then moving on to, meet Reka and Anna and having your story in their book. You're a life changer. We
Absolutely.
need those people in our
Absolutely.
lives too.
And
You know,
how many people can say that they're, a published author? I never
that's
thought I
exciting.
never thought I would be.
Yeah.
But there's so many ideas that I have research wise, and I sit here sometimes and think, am I the only person
No.
who has this idea? Like
No. And
I've
you're the only person that follows through. It's what you do with the information you have, or that you when you research. It's really taking that risk so that you can do new exciting things, and that's important.
Yeah, and I think, Julie, like, how is the book life changing? Maybe it's a living proof that you can do
Yes.
anything you never thought about before.
Yeah.
Right. And I want to thank you again, Reka, for sending out those copies for me, to my family in Hungary. Every single one of them responded, and they are so happy to see our family story in print. They were just really overjoyed.
Thank you, Julie. It was my absolute pleasure, and
Mhm.
I'm really glad to hear that they are, because that was our goal. We wanted to make sure that those stories are told to a broader audience and not just kept within the families, but also people who are not related to all this Hungarian American
Right.
dynamic can learn about those stories, because there are so many beautiful as yours, stories to tell.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I agree. I think those stories are important for even like the people in Hungary to hear, like our ancestors' families, in our family forest, because, it is part of their family too. Like it's nice for them to hear what their ancestors experienced in the US. For those that stayed in the US, as we all know that there are some stories where people return. So, and you'll find that information in the book, Hungarian Roots and American Dreams, which you can purchase an English copy or a copy in Hungarian. And I'll leave that information in the show notes. So I don't want to forget to say that, because that's really important. I really appreciate collaborating with you, Reka. It's been my absolute pleasure to work on this series with you, Celebrate Hungarian Heritage Together. Julie, you're an inspiration to all people who are researching their family tree. I definitely want to get you on an episode so that you can tell everyone at least how to get started if they haven't gotten started, and maybe give them some pointers on maybe some of their roadblocks that they're facing, and maybe you can clear that up for them. So Thank you so much, Julie, for telling us about your story that you contributed to Hungarian Roots and American Dreams, the Sunday soup, the parallel life that you live with your third cousin, Yano. It's a great story, and there's so many more to hear. Thanks so much, Julie, for being a guest today.
Christine, Reka, thank you so much for having me. The pleasure really was all mine. And I do look forward to if you ever do an episode on, family research, DNA, I'll be the first one in line.
Well, you're definitely on my list, top of the list. So we could talk about that going forward. Reka, thank you so much for being here today as my co-host. And I look forward to more episodes co-hosting with you and Anna about all the stories that were contributed to your book. Thanks, Reka.
Thank you, Christine. And the great news is that we will have more stories because we are just kicking off volume 2. So this might be also, a long-term cooperation.
Yeah, this is going to be a long-term collaboration, and I'm here for that. Thank you again, ladies, and I look forward to seeing you both hopefully soon and talking to you even sooner. Take care.
All righty. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining me and Reka Bakos on this episode of the Hungarian Heritage Podcast. We were both delighted to celebrate Hungarian heritage together with our guest, Julie Galatocky, as she shared her Hungarian heritage story. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of Hungarian Roots and American Dreams, either in English or in Hungarian, or if you're interested in joining the Facebook group that was mentioned in this episode, you will find that information in the show notes, as well as how you can get in contact with Reka Bakos. If you have feedback or questions about this episode, or you would like to connect with me at the podcast, you will also find that information in the show notes. If you've enjoyed this episode and you're interested in learning more about this Hungarian heritage community, please don't hesitate to reach out. I would love to hear from you. Our theme music is Hungarian Dance by Pony Music, used with special license from Envato Market. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, make sure you stay Hungarian Heritage Strong. Sziasztok!